Betsy, there's something wrong with Cayenne.
What's wrong, Wolfie?
A role-building transfers executive dashboards. As a result, the project manager proactively improves our granular, reliable, growing, and compliant segmentation.
She's pointing at the animal crackers as if she wants one.
Is that it, Wolfie? Do you want an animal cracker?
Controlling should build a solution-oriented, focused, aligned, and interactive idiosyncrasy. The clients efficiently right-size a quality assurance using our systematized, cutting-edge strategic staircases.
Go get Greg.
What is it?
Listen to her.
Our hyper-hybrid onboarding process structures a compelling customer centricity. A business-led pillar prioritizes promising brand pyramids. Our wide-ranging innovations generate nimble roles and responsibilities.
Oh my God. She's been infected with corporate. I told all of you to use the sanitizers. Seal off this department. Nobody from the 6th floor gets down here. We're going to Code Brown. Repeat, we're going to Code Brown.
A thought leader quickly enables our well-planned performance across our portfolio.
What?
Solutions-based differentiators embraces blended approaches, while responsiveness and branding strategy target the brand manager.
Damn it, she's got it too. Lydia, I need you to lock them in the bathroom. We can't take the chance of this spreading.
The human resources proactively structure the value-added quality management systems by thinking outside of the box.
We're all gonna die. Robots and apes will rule the planet. Introduce the show.
A sizable dotted line incentivizes the gatekeeper, so it's time to differentiate a vertical energy. And now he uses measure and cross-fertilization to inspire his chief client relationship officer, Colin McEnroe.
Yeah, we've had a little problem here with that. So that's a little bit more what we're going to be dealing with in the final segment of the show, that particular way in which corporations and consultants to corporations, usually in a quest to sound smarter than they actually are, begin inventing words and usages and twisting grammar around and using nouns as verbs and verbs as nouns. We'll get to all that. We're not talking about that right now. We're sort of really going to be talking about, initially anyway, the need for a new word, where a new word might come from. So, first of all, let me tell you who's on the show. We have an all-star lineup. I mean, we really do here. Lizzie Skurnick is the author of That Should Be a Word, based on her New York Times Magazine column of the past. Peter Sokolowski, a regular guest here with us, lexicographer and editor-at-large at Merriam-Webster, and joining us also from the West Coast, Jeffrey Nunberg, a linguist at UC Berkeley School of Information, chair emeritus of the usage panel for the American Heritage Dictionary. You hear him a lot on Fresh Air, and he's the author of The Ascent of the A Word, which we probably won't be talking about that much today. But I'm going to quickly just tell a story from last night, all right? Because it just sort of, I got a Lizzie Skurnick word for it anyway, which is, so last night I'm down at the Long Wharf Theater watching the amazing Audra McDonald sing. And, it's kind of a fashionable New Haven crowd. I'm from Hartford. I'm insecure, but I kind of had this black jeans and I had this kind of tuxedo-y looking shirt, but it's sort of an informal shirt that I was wearing untucked. And I thought I looked pretty cool, I'm walking around at the party before Audra McDonald, and I'm thinking I look pretty fly. And so this woman comes up to me. She's a very fashionable looking woman, and she catches my eye, and she kind of beckons me, and I go over to her. She goes over to me, and she says, now, do you have a restaurant, or is it just the catering? That was so not the mistake I wanted somebody to make. But there may be many Lizzie Skurnick words for this, but I feel as though my need to tell this story now, this story of a fashion fail, Lizzie Skurnick, is kind of ostentatious.
Yes, maybe. I feel like you were denigrated, though.
Yeah. Well, I was denigrated. But now, explain ostentatious. Explain this kind of word for us.
Oh, ostentatious is really showing off your hardships.
Yeah. And so I think you need to tell us sort of a little bit more about this project. So basically what you did in this column and with this book is there are things that need words, right?
Yes. There are these new things in our culture, or there are these little, interwoven behaviors that we have. And so what I've done is try to fill those in and get a sense of what our modern world is doing. But, by creating sort of versions of the words we have, or, smooshes and portmanteau of the words we have, but not completely made up words.
And so you make these words, and then you kind of push them out of the nest to see if they fly. Have any of them really taken wings? Have you seen, or taken wing, I guess one would say, have you seen one of your words? I mean, obviously the thrill would be in an informal, unplanned context to have a word of yours repeated back to you by someone who didn't know you coined it. Has that happened yet?
No, that's never happened. Although, generally people like one word and another person hates the word. My draft or birth, which is to bring a child that's been brought to a bar. My publicist thought that was the funniest word in the world. And, some reviewer was like, there are some stupid words like draft or birth. But also I think, my words are really to play with language. Some of the words that we really use, something like mansplain or manspread, they're not really word play, but they do really fill a need. And I think those are the ones that sort of catch on in active conversation.
I want to talk to Peter and to Jeff Nunberg about this. So, Peter, I mean, assuming that Lizzie doesn't think words up, where do new words come from?
Well, new words come from all of us, not just Lizzie. And in that case, we're all equal. That is to say, a dictionary editor has no more power than any other person for creating a word, because that's not how dictionaries work. We don't create words ourselves and put them in. We wait and see which words have caught on. And she had some great examples: mansplain and manspreading. If you observe social media at all, those are two very popular terms that I would say are likely to be included in dictionaries in the future. The word clickbait was just added to our unabridged dictionary online, and that's another good example. These are portmanteau words. Obviously, they're easy to form, but they are names for phenomena that are real, and therefore, because they're useful and they're easy to understand, they spread very quickly. We have 3 criteria for putting a word in a dictionary. First, widespread usage. Has to be used by many people in many places. Second is sustained usage, so over a period of time. And finally, meaningful usage. And by that we mean a word that is generally accepted to mean the same thing. So, for example, a word like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which we all know as a word, but we don't agree upon as something that carries meaning. It doesn't really mean anything except a long word that's fun to say.
Jeffrey Nunberg, one of the analogies you use is to coffee, dripping versus percolating. Help us out with that.
Yeah, well, there are words that enter the language by the drip method. That is to say, it's kind of trickle-down lexicography. They are coined by the media or people like the media, press agents and journalists and so on. And they work their way down into the language. Not that far, usually. It's hard to think of media creations that have actually become part of everyday speech compared to the number of them that are being churned out every day. And then there are the percolated ones that begin in everyday speech and slang and work their way up. And they tend to be different kinds of words. The portmanteau words that Lizzie was talking about, for example, there are thousands of these coined every year, some as jokes, some as part of the business slang you were talking about, and some of them do work their way into the language, co-opetition and that sort of thing. But most of them are kind of stunt words, and sometimes the dictionaries pick them up because it's, as Peter will be able to acknowledge, they're very good for getting media features about the new words you have in the dictionary, but they generally don't last very long.
I was trying to think of an example of exactly what you're talking about. One that came to my mind, and Lizzie, I'm sure you saw this in a lot of places. The word normcore was introduced, I think, last year or the year before, and it basically describes the way I dress, which is to say...
I just learned that word, actually.
Oh, really?
And my friend had to show me. Oh, God, yeah, I learned it like a week ago. And I was like, oh, so these people are just dressing like I did in 1987.
Right. I dressed the way you dressed in 1987, and unfortunately the way I dressed in 1987. And so normcore is, I don't even know how to exactly explain it, but it's certainly dressing in a way that indicates very little regards to one's fashion choices and kind of like a tourist or something, It's just, but Peter, to Jeff's point, it seems as though that's an example. I mean, I remember reading about it in, I think, New York Magazine, and reading it about there was a flurry of other articles about it. But it was a percolated term, right? It was a term that somebody tried to introduce, and it's the question is open about whether it can get kind of the street value that Jeffrey Nunberg is talking about.
Sure, and because this you're talking about sort of being cool by not trying too hard, I guess, is one of the
or not being cool by not trying hard enough.
Maybe that's true, and yeah, it could be percolated. But the thing is, with with social media, we all can be we can all be sort of journalists. In other words, we can maybe have a combination of Jeff's drip method and the percolated method, because if you may have a great idea, but you're not a journalist, and it spreads quickly on Twitter or Facebook or something, and so it's moving faster than ever. I will say that when we add new words, it's absolutely true that we hear about the fancy ones or the ones from pop culture, but there's also, of course, the dictionary is a big book and it's full of very boring words, and a lot of them are really important, and if we don't keep up with them, we fall behind. And so, for example, we just added infographic, net neutrality, and palliative care. They're not so fun to talk about, but they're important parts of the culture and the lexicon.
So we have to sort of get into that whole discussion also, sort of descriptive versus prescriptive. And so, Lizzie, I suppose we have to make sure there are no grammandos among us. Tell us what a grammando is.
A grammando is someone who aggressively monitors your use of the English language. Although I just thought of a word for everyone being a reporter, which is sort of a grown word, but journalist. A
journalist? Because we all join up? Yeah. So these are words, they just come to you. So Jeffrey Nunberg, you could be accused of being a little bit of a grammando. You monitor the use of the English language. And so one of the questions, in an environment like this one, where partly because of the digital revolution and maybe for other reasons too, there is kind of a need for new words a lot of the time, and sudden coinages of new words, and then ways of circulating them that are kind of non-canonical, right? There are all these just people out here shooting words around on the internet and trying to get them adopted. Does that make you worry that sort of the lexicon and the canonical lexicon is just either going to die or wither?
No, not at all. I think people are coining many, many more new words than they ever did. They're being circulated more efficiently than ever before. And as Peter says, the line between public and private, which used to be pretty strict, has been eroded by all the media that merged the two. So you see lots and lots more words going into at least temporary circulation, but the average half-life of a new word is also decreased with time. So a lot of the words that dictionaries announce there with great fanfare they're including probably won't live as long as your hamster does.
All right, so I feel as though there's a Skurnik.
Meaning nothing about your hamster.
Yeah, no, but I feel like there's a Skurnik coinage coming in there that's sort of some kind of it has the word hamster in it somewhere. All right, so by the way, as we go along here, if you want to call in, don't call in to complain about the fact that the people in your office say conversate or something like that, because we've done those shows before, and we know you're angry, and you're angry about it. Maybe in the third and final segment, there could be a little bit of that, but we're not really talking about that right now. But we are talking about sort of new words or the need for new words, and our number is 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. So I was asking on social media about this, and there were some interesting suggestions. And Peter, to your point that often, a simpler word, a less flashy word, can either get into the language, that it maybe isn't as clever or witty or smart as a Lizzie Skurnik coinage, but might seep in there. I think there's also some real meat and potatoes words that don't exist, but maybe I'm wrong, and I'll ask all three of you about this. Someone wrote, please come up with a word for that person in your life after 50 when you are not married, not boyfriend or partner or significant other. And then this person has written, please. And I know exactly what this person means, which is that, I'm over 6, I'm 60, and I am in a relationship, and I'm not married, and I feel pretty stupid calling that person my girlfriend. And significant other sounds clunky. And Charles Osgood years ago tried Postle Q, person of opposite sex sharing living quarters, or whatever that's an acronym for. But so Peter, am I missing something? Does that word exist?
No, it doesn't, to my knowledge, and I agree with you. There are holes in every language is expression. That's a real fact, and it is odd to hear a word like boyfriend or girlfriend referring to an adult or even an older person. And so I agree with you that there are always holes, but the fact is we don't always fill them. For example, we have trouble in English with the with a non-gendered pronoun, his or her. We can't refer to a singular person without referring to a gender, and that's caused a lot of trouble. But through the entire history of the language, they has been used as a kind of convenient solution, and is more elegant than some, as opposed to saying his or her, for example, or he or she. And so that's one of the holes that remains in English that we have not yet been able to fill.
It's in the sense of everybody should admit that they took their baby to the bar.
Exactly, yeah. It's called the epicene pronoun. The epicene pronoun, yeah.
So, Jeffrey Nunberg, is there sort of a linguist's theory about about why a word doesn't emerge? I mean, that would seem to be kind of a useful word, particularly as society changes. There are more people who are in relationships who are not married to one another. Does anybody have a theory about the absence of something that should exist?
Well, I think it's interesting that these words aren't adopted. I don't think it's by now. Sometimes it is purely by accident. I don't know why we don't have a word prepone that means the opposite of postpone. It just makes so much sense. Instead, you have to say the meeting's been moved up or something like that. That's just weird. But in the case of a word for various kinds of partners and so on, I think the fact that we don't have a word reflects a certain uncertainty. It's almost as if we enjoy the absence of a word and the need to look for paraphrases and circumlocutions to express those notions. Maybe because those social roles are changing so rapidly.
All right, we actually sent two of our outstanding interns, Alex Dubin and Hallie St. Germain, out into the street to ask them about that feeling that there's of something that there's no word for. So we'll be Vox 2 right here.
Do you ever feel something there's no word to explain?
Oh my God, like going through childbirth, there's like no word to describe that.
The language that we have today to describe globalization and global trends is probably insufficient for some of the challenges that we're facing as a country.
Yeah, like the awkwardness of coming up with something on the spot.
I like that.
That's talkword.
Talkword?
Talkword.
You already had that one.
Talkword.
And Lizzie, did you, in the amount of time that you've had, have you come up with the word for the person that you're with who, I always say that it's like, this Pequot Native American term, the person that I'm with that I'm not married to. But is there actually a nice Lizzie Skernickism?
No, but I thought of one while we're talking, which is just the person who you're sort of married to just because you live with them. And so for the man, that would be groomy. But I don't know what it would be for the wife yet. I'm working on it.
That's the portmanteau. All right. We also have a call coming in here from Frances in Greenwich. I think she has a fairly good question. Hi, Frances. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. I would love to replace, as an old person, I would love to replace the word elderly with my very proper word, but it sounds better to my ears. I'd love to circulate it. And the word is olderly.
Olderly. I don't know that really solves the problem somehow.
Well, it feels better, and the people I've suggested it to smile and think it's okay.
Yeah, you want a word that suggests snow on the roof but fire in the furnace, and I don't think it's quite there yet. But Jeffrey Nunberg, one of the things we're talking about here too is words don't exist in a vacuum. They bump up against certain social walls, and so if you're looking for a different word to describe, say, a generation of people over 70 or whatever that she's talking about right now, I mean, there's a lot of people who are there are stakeholders, right? There are organizations that call themselves certain things. There are people who really are going to care about whether that word is the kind of word they want applied to them.
Well, I think that's true, particularly when you're dealing with these social categories. The absence of the need for euphemisms for old goes back just about forever. Nobody's happy with just saying the old. And there are organizations that are built around elderly and older Americans and so on that then would have to change their names. But I think it really has to do with a kind of social reluctance almost to say things for what they are. I mean, to give things, to name things with the words that describe what they actually are.
Yeah, in that sense, you could make an argument for replacing elderly with old. You know, I mean,
there's no. I mean, old means old.
Right.
Elder is a comparative, and older Americans is a comparative, and seniors is a euphemism, and on the other end, you have people using words like creakies and crumblies and slang words for old people. But the old is a word that's charged with all kinds of meanings that make people very uncomfortable.
Peter, you know, one thing that's happening here too is that, and it's probably right there in Francis's call, is that this big, huge pig inside the python generation of highly self-conscious people who've been written about and talked about all of their lives and have written about themselves and talked about their lives since they could, the baby boom generation, they're getting older now. And I assume generations in particular, and probably maybe this one in particular, they drive language.
Oh, absolutely, and especially, it has to be said, medical terminology. And so the new terms that are being added to the dictionary, things like neurofeedback that has just been added, but there have to be many others. I know there have been in the last decade especially. They're following the baby boom just as the entire commercial life of America has followed the baby boom as they grew up and now grow older. It's absolutely true. And I want to mention to Jeff that your finger's on the pulse of the English language, and other cultures who speak English have different reflexes because prepone is used very commonly in Indian English. And I heard it used fluently in India when I was there. And it's a useful term. I totally agree with Jeff, and I think it's only a matter of time before it makes its way over to American English.
Well, somebody actually requested a word for the sip of coffee you take after you've taken the last sip of coffee. When you bring the cup to your lips to drink and it's gone already, every damn time there must be a word for that last missing sip of coffee. There's a word for the sip before the last sip, etc. And so, I mean, to Jeffrey Nunberg's point, maybe this should be called...
I have a word
You've
for
got
that,
it? What
by
is
the
it,
way.
Lizzie? What is it?
I have two words.
Two? She's got two already.
I have two. Well, that one is brewful.
Yeah.
Brewful.
You're sad when your coffee's over. Yeah, okay.
You're sad when your coffee's over, or you just brew it. But also, I did have the word for giving birth, because I actually did give birth while I was writing the book. You know, not during the writing, but while I was writing it. And that is pacifier, but the last four words are F-I-R-E. And you men can't judge that.
No, we can't.
Because you don't know.
We can't tell you it's great, and we can't tell you it's inadequate. We just have no idea. We're completely agnostic. But, you know, Jeffrey Nunberg, it seems to be another thing that could be going on there with the last sip of coffee, and then the sip of coffee that's not there after the last sip of coffee. You know, we have the word penultimate. We don't have the word post-ultimate. At least I don't think we do.
Well, after the last is the ultimate, right?
Yeah. Well, no, the ultimate's the last. So this is post-ultimate. It's the post-ultimate. It's the same as when you go up a flight of stairs and think there's one more stair than there actually is.
I like that. What Lizzie does, and what people have done, Barbara Wallraff used to do this, but it goes back to Time magazine. It actually goes back to the Renaissance. People were coming up with words, often blends of the sort that Lizzie produces, to describe things that suddenly emerged in the culture that seemed as if they needed a name. In the 17th century, 16th century, they talked about philosophers, for example, and navigators were people who claimed false geographic discoveries and so on. So this goes back a long time, and in each case, there's a kind of Seinfeld feeling to it, where you're pointing out some regularity, some feature of culture that everybody's experienced, but that hasn't been drawn to common experience, to common knowledge, and that's what Lizzie's words do, I think.
All right, we're going to grab a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be very on fleek, and we're also going to try to explain to you what that could conceivably mean.
Macadamia vestibule, Pina colada Managua, Velcro escargot malarkey, Pacadillo glockenspiel.
So we're back. We're talking to Lizzie Skurnick. Her new book is That Should Be a Word, A Language Lover's Guide to chorgasms, povertunity, brattling, and 250 other much-needed terms for the modern world. Peter Sokolowski is with us, lexicographer and editor-at-large at Merriam-Webster. Jeffrey Nunberg, a linguist at UC Berkeley School of Information, regular contributor to NPR's Fresh Air, which is on right before us, and the author most recently, or maybe most recently, of, at least sort of penultimately, of The Ascent of the A-Word. And so I want to go to this set of tape that we have, but before we do this, just so I don't forget, Peter, last week, tomorrow we're doing a show about Esperanto, so we must be on some kind of kick here, but last week we were doing another Bitsy Kaplan show that involved misfortune, and we spent one whole segment on Schadenfreude. Now, there's an interesting, and somebody actually today in the prep for this show said, well, I'd like a word for Schadenfreude that's easier to spell and pronounce. But this is an example of there not really being the English word and just a word from another language just winning and winning so decisively that, but I don't know, how does that happen?
Well, we say we borrow words from other languages. That's not quite accurate because we never give them back, and that's one thing. And in sort of a more, different kind of example, just so you can think about how languages work, think of a word like peloton, which is a group of bicycle riders, which we borrowed from French because of the Tour de France. However, we borrowed that word 300 years ago to mean a group of people, a group of men, and it came out as platoon. So the fact is the same single French word came into English twice, and we sort of mangled it the first time around. The second time around, we kept its spelling as we have with Schadenfreude. And so that's how it happens. We borrow a word, it falls into a certain niche in the language, and it stays there.
All right, so we also recently did a show about David Letterman, and David Letterman used to have this segment, which I really loved, called Is This Anything? Yes. And Is This Anything is sort of an ultimate question for lexicographers and linguists.
Sure.
Is this anything?
Absolutely.
So we also, when Alex Dubin and Hallie St. Germain were out on the street, there was a term that came up that I personally had never heard, but all of our interns knew it. So first of all, let's hear that tape.
What's your favorite new word?
I like chillax. I think chilling and relaxing is like a great combination.
FOMO. It means, I think it's fear of missing out.
Fleek. Being on top of your game, like being 100% at all times. Like you have to be fleek.
I'm such an old fart that new words don't fit into my vocabulary. I do pick up new things from my iPhone, so an app for this and an app for that. App. I like the word app.
So there's a nice word. Well, in the middle of all that, you heard this term fleek or on fleek. And so it turned out that all of our interns knew this word. Some of them knew it only as something that they would use ironically. So it's a word that had currency for about 14 seconds, and then if you were in college instead of in high school, you would use it to sort of make fun of the way people in high school talk. But this came up with Jon Stewart recently. So let's hear that clip, too.
But fine if she wants her city to burn. Who am I? I'm just a simple governor with the executive authority to provide a standing army of reservists. But I guess calling them out would not be on fleek, as the young people. You swore that that's a thing. You swore that on fleek was a thing. They swore to me. I said on fleek, and they said no, that's a thing. And I was like,
all right, so Jeffrey Nunberg, this is kind of a linguist and lexicographer moment, maybe more of an anxiety moment for Peter Sokolowski because he and Merriam-Webster really have to make a call about something like this, but not an unusual thing. Something that's out there in the oral culture. The oral culture is also now the digital culture. It takes no time whatsoever for somebody to type in something that they've just said. So how do linguists make a call like this? I mean, it's something that people kind of know about, but not well enough so that Jon Stewart can get either applause or a laugh out of it. How do you evaluate something like this?
Well, I think the very idea of making a call is an old-fashioned one. This still comes from the idea that once a word goes into the dictionary, it's been accorded an official welcome in the language, and it has an official status and so on. That hasn't been, it was never really true, but it was a useful fiction until I think 1961 would be the year I'd say it ended. So that, they can put fleek in, they can take it out. It's around, it's out there, it's used a lot, almost always, as you say, in air quotes. But putting it in or out doesn't change its status. It's this word that appeared in a 6-second Vine and caught on and was circulated, and why not put it in there?
Ooh, he knows the whole on fleek story. That's kind of scary. He knows about the Vine. So, Peter, what does that word have to do to earn its stripes?
Well, first of all, it's been the subject of not one but 2 lengthy blog posts at our unabridged website, and in fact, the woman in question, the woman who said it in that Vine, corresponded via email with my colleague Emily Brewster, and answered some questions about it, which is kind of fun because we almost have, as it's very rare to know the sort of the person who coins a term, but she did say that she meant it to mean something like perfectly done or just right, or on point, very correct. And it's really taken off. And every slang moves quickly and it changes fast, as we all know. There are certain words like the word cool. My friend David Skinner has written about the fact that this is a word that has always been cool. It was cool in the 50s and is still cool today. But a lot of words sound dated. And they were cool in the 70s, for example, and are no longer cool today. So, the fashion in language is just like fashion in clothing.
So Lizzie, you're in the business of making up words, not mastering other people's words. Were you hip to on fleek?
Yes, I was. Well, sorry. I actually have 2 thoughts about it. First of all, for your intern that wanted the other Schadenfreude, that's joy fail.
Joy fail.
Joy fail.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's
it. Thank you. And this is what I loved about on fleek, because when I heard it, I sort of thought of, en vogue, and I thought of chic, and I thought of just sort of fleek, like how you flick your hand when you're really, really cool. And so that's one of those words to me that sort of, it just suggests so many things that we have a sound for. And even though it doesn't mean anything, it's kind of like, it's fun for us to say automatically. And so I also was like, well, now I'm going to say on fleek all the time.
Although it feels now it feels as though the on should be spelled E-N.
I thought it was.
No.
I thought it was spelled E-N and that it was F-L-I-Q-U-E. I had no idea.
Yeah, no, at least not in the hashtag. But all right, so here's Gay in New Haven with a comment or question. Hi, Gay, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking me. I just wanted to tell you about a word that my daughter came up with when she was, I guess, in her junior year of high school and having to read Charles Dickens, who, got paid by the word for what he wrote. And she came up with circumloquacious,
So,
which
yeah,
for people who have verbal diarrhea trying to get around not actually coming to the point, it's perfect.
So it's basically the adjective of circumlocution.
Yeah, there's the word logorrhea, of course,
yes.
Which is sort of similar, sort of on the model of diarrhea. But with words.
Lizzie, we should just say a little bit more about what you do in your book, because one of the I mean, Peter kind of alluded to this before. There's just sort of realities in life. Life is changing very fast. The digital revolution is an incredible driver of change. So there is kind of a necessity for a word like clickbait. I think that was one of the ones that you mentioned, Peter. Or screen grab would be another one. I mean, you kind of have to have a word for that. What you've done is sort of also look at people's actual living conditions and working conditions and try to come up with words that do express common experiences. So you maybe run us through a few of these, like povertunity and cubicle and stuff. Give us a few of those.
Well, so povertunity is a job with more status than salary. And the one that people really seem to like is fidgetal. And what I loved about that is that it was one of my layered words, so that it has fidget and digital. But I looked at it later and it also has digit, like your finger, but also like binary code. And so cubicle is one with C-U-L-L, that's when you fire people. And the one I love, again, for the lady who wanted childbirth, my favorite one is birthy, B-E-A-R-T-H-Y, which is to have sort of a natural birth experience. I was not very birthy.
So, Jeffrey Nunberg, there's kind of a politics to I mean, as Orwell proved, there's a politics to all aspects of language, but there's a politics to who comes up with words, particularly words that define and characterize a subgroup. And one of the ones that I thought about getting ready for today's show is anti-vaxxer. Okay, it's usually spelled with 2 X's too. Anti-vaxxer for people who, for one reason or other, do not want to vaccinate their children because they have health concerns or they've read this or that study. And that's a word that comes from without instead of from within, right? I mean, if a word like that becomes the word for what you are, you've kind of lost an important linguistic battle, no?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, there are these battles over words, particularly since the '60s, when we hit on this idea of sort of linguistic self-determination, that groups should have a right to name themselves and to decide what they shouldn't be called. These have been big issues, and you look at issues like abortion or, in particular, immigration, where you've got competing words, none of which really managed to capture the whole field. So, whether you say illegal aliens or illegal immigrants or undocumented and so on, those all commit you to a point of view. Gay and homosexual were in that position for a while, and now gay has really won out. It's the default word. If somebody speaks of the homosexual lifestyle or a homosexual agenda, you know exactly what they think about, for example, same-sex marriage.
And Peter, I also assume that, he just made me think of something else, which is that kind of famously in the most recent State of the Union address, President Obama not only used bisexual and lesbian, both for the first time in a State of the Union address, but also transgender, a word which is newer anyway than, say, transsexual or transvestite. And I would assume that's kind of that makes a kind of ticking noise in the world of a lexicographer.
It sure does. I happen to know that word is being drafted as we speak, essentially, at least this week, as we revise the unabridged dictionary. But there are also I can think of 2 quick comments. There are also words that are common words that are hiding in plain sight. A word like thing in the way that Jon Stewart just used it. Is that a thing?
Right.
And that is not defined, as far as I know, in that particular sense in any dictionary. So it's sitting right there in front of us, and so we have to catch up and use it. And I love the title of Lizzie's book, which is That Should Be a Word. I think one of the most powerful reflexes for adults to look up words is the question, is that a word? Is that in the dictionary? And we had some evidence of that during the election of 2012, when Joe Biden had the debate with Paul Ryan and used the word malarkey, and malarkey became the single most looked up word on a single day during the election cycle. And I think it was because people were simply checking, is that really a word?
Right. That was a word that was probably about to die too from lack of usage. And
possibly.
He just put the paddles right on it.
If I can add something there, I think Peter's hit on something important, because dictionaries in general and the media are much better at seizing on genuinely new words like twerk and so on than at the changed senses of old words, as with thing, or slur. It strikes me there is no dictionary I know of that has a definition of slur to mean a word that insults a racial or ethnic group in virtue of the membership in that group. Merriam-Webster doesn't have it, the OED doesn't have it, the American Heritage doesn't have it, and that's just because it evolved really in the 1960s out of older uses of the word, and nobody's caught on to that at this point, whereas twerk gets in there, that is invented on a Tuesday and gets in on Wednesday.
No, he's absolutely right. Let me give you, in 30 seconds, 2 great examples. One is the word macaron, which is the kind of coconut cookie, macaroon, is the other way of saying it, but it has also meant that kind of nice, the Parisian kind, the sandwich cookie. We've just finally added that one after 100 years of that kind of dessert. But also in the 11th Collegiate, for the first time, we had a new sense of the indefinite article a or a, meaning in the sense a triumphant Ms. Jones greeted her supporters. So that meaning distinguishing the person from their usual or former or hypothetical condition had never been isolated before. So that's where the nitty-gritty of lexicography is, seeing the language up close and sometimes a lot later than we might like.
We've got to go to a break here, but before we do, Lizzie, one example of the kind of thing that Jeffrey's talking about, I think, is the repurposing of a word that happens seamlessly, too, is the word spam. Spam was a brand name, right? It was like this disgusting stuff you buy in a can. And then, really, almost effortlessly, it became this other thing.
Right. And why? But I love that. I love words like spam or like smoothie, where it's sort of like there's no particular reason that we should use this word for this, but we automatically know that that's the word we need.
All right. Yes, it is the what did Mark Twain say? The difference between the fire. I can't remember it. Somebody will come up with it. All right. We have to take a quick break anyway. Doesn't make any difference. We'll be back after this.
Got me caught up in the moment. She walk like a model, hourglass physique, hair, nails fit sexy, everything on fleek, sheesh, everything on fleek, hair, nails fit sexy, everything on fleek. She walk like a model, hourglass physique, hair, nails fit sexy, everything on fleek.
The key people who empowered the large-scale, siloed, and analytics-based calibration for today's show are Betsy Kaplan and me, Kyone Wolf. Our onboarding solution targets were Anna Geismar, Katie McAuliffe, and Allison Ehrenreich. Greg Hill reimagines a powerful social sphere for us at WNPR Colin. The top-down mindsets of Greg, Betsy, and Lydia Brown were featured in the introduction. An aligned, compelling workflow for playing the part of Bill Curry was impacted by our corporate Vice Director of Strategic Planning. For show pages, articles, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff differentiating their go-to market collaborative flexibilities, visit our website wnpr.org/Colin. Tomorrow, a show about Esperanto, which will make much more sense than this did. And now, back to Colin.
Yes, these announcements have made no sense whatsoever, but that's partly because they're in corporate speak. We're going to talk a little bit about that in this segment. So, and we're going to add one more guest to the conversation. But before we do, so Jeffrey Nunberg, Orwell in his essay on politics in the English language says, I wish I could quote it exactly, but he says when you hear words that or phrases that are used inappropriately in a kind of nonsensical way, it's a good indication that something abominable is happening, And so, I mean, he would have understood right away why collateral damage would be a term for people getting killed who were not the actual target of the weapon. But I feel like there's another thing that happens, too, which is that, and you hear it in the corporate speak, that when there isn't that much to say, when there isn't a penetrating and fresh insight, when there isn't any new substance, or when there's a fear that there isn't any new substance, one of the things I think people resort to is just this twisting around of the language to suggest that something impressive is going on.
I think that's true, but I think the interesting thing about corporate speech is that it's language that everybody, and I mean everybody, feels superior to. So we hear this language, we say, oh, those people are being pretentious or empty, but everybody thinks that. People post Scott Adams Dilbert cartoons on the walls of their cubicles. Scott Adams designs material for corporate HR departments. Management laughs at the language. Everybody laughs at the language, and that's really what makes it effective, that we can feel outside it, even as we use it, and the fact that we think it's ridiculous doesn't make it any less effective than if we took it absolutely seriously. So Orwell's picture of a world in which people use this language unthinkingly is not the way things work out. Actually, we use it with great irony, and it doesn't matter. It's like a school song. It doesn't matter if it's stupid. You sing along anyway.
Also joining us is Kristen Comforo, an assistant professor of communication at the University of Hartford. I'm going to let you react to what Jeffrey Nunberg just said, but I mean, it does seem like there's no slowing the tide of this. No amount of ridicule, mockery, or resistance seems to make any difference.
Absolutely. I think the phrase "resistance is futile" is probably something that resonates, quite well in the office. I mean, you're just kind of caught up in this kind of communication pattern. It is interesting to think of how we kind of are introspective about it and kind of throw it back on itself in almost this kind of satirical kind of way. When people are taking it a little too seriously, you sometimes kind of have to wonder, where they stand within, this particular communication moment, if they really know their stuff or not, because that's really what, some of this jargon is doing in terms of creating the ins and the outs and who gets it and who doesn't. And it is quite an interesting cultural pattern that we see.
Well, it seems to me that one of the things that I noticed, Peter, and I don't know whether Merriam-Webster, you probably do have to track this, is one of the things that's done in these situations is the repurposing of a word so that it exits its usual part of speech and enters another one. So nouns is verbs, verbs is nouns. That's what I'm really trying to say. So suddenly the ask,
right,
the solve, Sure. So these are verbs that have suddenly turned into nouns, right?
Yeah, we call it function shift, and essentially at this point, all verbs can be nouns. There's no the gates are broken, and they can sound kind of new, and they can sound annoying. Language changes just fast enough that we notice, and usually we object to those changes that we do notice. So impactful is not one that I love myself. I don't use it myself, but it's something that we hear quite a lot.
We had a wonderful, lovely, terrific guest on last week on a show, I won't say who it was, who used scenario as a transitive verb. He said, well, yeah, they didn't scenario this situation.
Well,
and
the new one for me is surface. We have to surface that on the website, and this is used by people paid many times more than me to make websites look good and look pretty and be functional, and I'm still surprised by it. But I understand it, and it's useful, and it's fast, and everyone in the room understands it.
I don't understand it. Now, I'm in a little delicate position, Peter. Let me just say I have a friend who works at a company where they have a new mission statement come up that was dreamed up for them by consultants that says that part of the mission is to surface all sides of the issue without judgment. And I honestly don't know what surface means in that context.
That's interesting. When in the context of websites, I understand it's to make visible and make put it on the surface. It's a kind of almost a literal understanding. That one I sort of get. It's a little foggy to me too, though.
Jeff,
I feel like they need to use the term "own it," right? They need to make it ownable rather than surface. Bring it down to your core, or bake it in, if you will.
Oh, I hate all of
I
those.
think
Yeah, go ahead, Lizzie.
I think it's float all ideas, maybe, because when I I think they just mean float all ideas.
Well, obviously,
I think of something coming up from the deep.
Yeah, if we don't have consensus on this, there's something wrong here. Well, Jeffrey Nunberg, Peter just said the gates are broken, and you said earlier on that there was something old-fashioned about making the call. Who's going to make the call? I mean, is that just the case? I mean, do we have to just sort of crumple into a heap of genial agnosticism about this and just say, well, okay, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to say, it's fine?
No, not at all. I think the people have much more respect for the dictionary than, frankly, the dictionary deserves nowadays as a institution that validates.
Peter
words.
can hear you.
The time was when it's in the dictionary.
Right.
Conferred a certain status on a word as reflecting the opinion of elite usage and literary style and so on. And that's not true anymore. Anything gets into the dictionary. It should, given the opening to popular culture and the role of the media. So a dictionary should put anything in there. We still have a responsibility to decide that such and such is not a word you want to use in an op-ed in the New York Times or in writing a serious book, but it can be used in casual speech, that such and such is a piece of corporate jargon that has no place in my vocabulary. Those are decisions everybody has to make. You just can't look to this institution in Springfield or Boston or Oxford to make that decision for you.
Yeah, he's absolutely right, and the fact is there is such a thing as standard English. And grammar represents the rules of a language, but usage is the manners of a language. And there is lots of usage of advice in the dictionary that tells you when and when not to use a word. There is such a thing as standard English. It's not a superior form of English, but it is a privileged form of the language. And if we want to exercise those privileges, that is to say, if we want to go to graduate school or get a job in a serious profession, we have to acknowledge those rules. And that's where some arbitration has to happen.
Lizzie, you're going to get the last word on this show, but I'm wondering, I mean, in the midst of all that conversation, and I seem to be the most prescriptive person sitting here, but do you ever worry, I mean, that one of these words might be absorbed into the English language, but then sort of make curmudgeons on the New York Times copy desk look really unhappy? I mean, these are colorful, wonderful words in many cases, but, to some people, they're going to be, oh, no, not a word like that. I hate that word.
I just ignore poopy pants like that in all areas of my life.
All right.
Poopy pants, by the way, is a word that caught on very easily.
Yeah. Well, everybody understands what that one is, as opposed to surface, anyway. Everybody understands what that means. Peter is poopy pants in the Merriam-Webster.
Not yet. We'll take a citation.
Yeah, so the gates are broken, so you can throw your poopy pants right through them, and they'll hit poor Peter, who'll be standing there. All right, we have to stop here. I would love to keep going, but thanks to Lizzie Skurnick. Her book is That Should Be a Word. Peter Sokolowski, lexicographer, editor-at-large for Merriam-Webster. Jeffrey Nunberg, linguist at UC Berkeley School of Information. We stole him from Terry Gross today. He's the author of Ascent of the A-Word. Kristen Comforo, assistant professor of communication at University of Hartford. Gotta go. We'll be back tomorrow with Esperanto, which I will be able to speak some of by then.
Make it pop, streamline, think outside the box. Leverage, vocabulary, increase your small salary. You know, it's kind of scary. Buzzwords, so necessary. Leverage, vocabulary, increase your small salary. You know, it's kind of scary. Buzzwords, so necessary.
At the end of the day, we need to take a holistic approach to functional training in the wheelhouse of beta transparency so we can calibrate expectations and collaborate in the virtualization of real-time social bookmarking and workflow of our ROI.
That makes sense. Let's get it done. Thank you for your hard work and thoughtful research, Kion.
Say what?